The galaxy had seen many species rise and fall across thousands of years. The Velkari Empire had conquered 300 worlds. The Synthri Collective had built machines that could think faster than light could travel. The Drovian swarm had consumed entire solar systems in their endless hunger. Yet none of them understood the strange creatures from the third planet of a small yellow star. None of them understood humans. Commander Cal Vorn stood at the observation deck of the orbital station, watching Earth spin slowly below. He was a tall man with gray streaks running through his dark hair. His face carried the scars of 20 years of service against threats that most civilians would never know existed. On his hip hung a sword that looked completely out of place in the gleaming metal corridors of the space station. The blade was wrapped in leather that had been worn smooth by generations of hands. The pommel was simple iron, blackened by age. But carved into the blade itself were symbols that predated human writing, runes that no scholar had ever been able to translate. Today, those runes were glowing with a soft blue light. Kale placed his hand on the hilt and felt the familiar warmth spreading through his palm. The sword had belonged to his father and his father before him, stretching back through a lineage that disappeared into the fog of ancient history. Every firstborn son had carried it. Every firstborn son had felt it warn them when darkness approached. The communication device on his wrist buzzed. He tapped it without looking away from the stars. "Commander Vorn, we have a situation in Sector 7. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Chun, his second in command. Her tone was carefully controlled, but he could hear the fear beneath it. "You need to see this." He made his way through the corridors of the station, passing scientists and soldiers who moved aside when they saw the glow coming from his weapon. They knew what it meant. Everyone on this station knew the old stories, even if most of the galaxy had forgotten them. The command center was a circular room filled with holographic displays and blinking consoles. Chun stood at the central platform, her fingers moving across a control panel. Around her, a dozen technicians worked in tense silence. On the main screen, Kale saw something that made his blood turn cold. A ship had appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in organic growths that pulsed with a sickly green light. Tentacles extended from its body, each one longer than a mountain range. It moved through space with a slow, deliberate grace that suggested intelligence and purpose. "The Void Walkers," Kale said quietly. Chun nodded. Her face had gone pale. "We thought they were a myth, a story to scare children. But our sensors confirm it. That ship matches every description from the old texts. Commander, those texts are over 10,000 years old." Kale stared at the creature on the screen. The Void Walkers were not a species in any traditional sense. They were something older, something that existed before the first stars had formed. They traveled between galaxies, feeding on the energy of civilizations. They had destroyed the precursors, the ancient race that had seeded life throughout the universe. They had ended empires that had lasted millions of years. And now one of them was coming to Earth. "How long until it reaches us?" he asked. 12 hours at its current speed." Kale looked down at his sword. The runes were burning brighter now, their blue light reflecting off the metal walls of the command center. He could feel the blade vibrating in its sheath, eager to be drawn. "Contact the Council," he ordered. "Tell them to initiate Protocol Omega and get me a shuttle to the surface." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Military forces across the planet mobilized. Evacuation orders went out to coastal cities. Underground bunkers that had been built during the First Contact War were open for the first time in decades. The orbital defense grid powered up, its weapons pointing toward the approaching nightmare. But Kale knew that none of it would matter. The Void Walkers had faced weapons far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. They had survived attacks that had shattered planets and torn holes in space itself. Technology would not save them. He landed his shuttle in a valley deep in the mountains of what had once been called Scotland. The place was sacred to his family, a location that had been passed down through countless generations along with the sword. Here, in a cave hidden behind a waterfall, his ancestors had made their stand against the darkness that came before recorded history. The cave was dark and cold. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming pools on the ancient stone floor. Kale walked deeper, guided by the glow of his blade. The runes cast strange shadows on the walls, illuminating carvings that depicted battles between humans and things that had no names. At the very back of the cave, he found what he was looking for. An altar made of stone that was older than the mountains themselves. On its surface, matching runes glowed with the same blue light as his sword. When he placed the blade on the altar, the entire cave began to shake. Light exploded from the runes, filling the space with a radiance that should have been blinding, but somehow was not. Kale felt knowledge flowing into his mind, memories that belonged to all the heroes who had come before him. He saw his ancestors fighting shadow creatures in the forests of prehistoric Earth. He saw them standing against the Void Walkers when they had come before, in an age so ancient that even the stars were different. And he understood. Humanity had faced this threat before. Long before they had built cities or invented writing, humans had fought the Void Walkers. They had won not through technology or superior numbers, but through something the ancient darkness could not comprehend: the ability to believe in something greater than themselves, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, the power that came from love, from hope, from the stubborn refusal to surrender. The runes were a gift from that first victory, a reminder and a weapon, passed down through the ages so that humanity would never forget who they truly were. Kale picked up his sword. The blade had transformed. It now burned with a light that rivaled the sun, a pure white radiance that pushed back against any shadow. He could feel the strength of every ancestor who had ever held it, their courage flowing through him like a river. He returned to his shuttle and flew up through the atmosphere, through the orbital defenses, and into the darkness beyond. The Void Walker filled his view as he approached. Up close, it was even more terrifying. He could see faces in its surface, the echoes of every civilization it had consumed. Their screams reached him even through the vacuum of space, a psychic assault that would have driven any other being mad. But Kale was human, and humans had evolved in a universe that wanted to kill them. They had survived ice ages and plagues, wars, and disasters. They had looked into the abyss of their own extinction more times than any species should have been able to endure. And they were still here. He opened the hatch of his shuttle and stepped out into space. The sword's light created a bubble of protection around him, allowing him to breathe, to move, to fight. He flew toward the Void Walker like a shooting star, leaving a trail of blazing white light in his wake. The creature noticed him. It was like being stared at by a mountain. Tentacles reached toward him, each one capable of crushing a battleship. Kale cut through them with his blade, leaving trails of dying darkness in his path. The Void Walker screamed, a sound that shook the very fabric of reality. It had never felt pain before. It had never faced a threat that could actually harm it. For millions of years, it had consumed and destroyed without opposition. Now, a single human was making it bleed. Kale fought his way across the surface of the creature, cutting through defenses that would have stopped an entire fleet. With each strike, he released more light into the universe. With each wound he inflicted, the Void Walker grew weaker. He found its core deep within its massive body, a sphere of absolute darkness, the heart of the ancient evil. It pulsed with stolen energy, the life force of countless dead civilizations. The Void Walker spoke to him then, not with words, but with pure thought. It showed him visions of what it could offer: immortality, power beyond imagination, a place at its side as it consumed the galaxy. All he had to do was surrender. Kale smiled. He thought of his family, his friends, the billions of humans living on the planet below. He thought of their laughter, their tears, their dreams. Every small act of kindness, every moment of joy, every struggle and triumph that made up human existence. "You will never understand us," he said. "And that is why you will lose." He drove his sword into the core. Light erupted from the wound, spreading through the Void Walker's body like fire through dry wood. The creature writhed and thrashed, its screams tearing at the edges of space. Planets across the solar system felt earthquakes. Stars flickered in distant galaxies. The fabric of reality itself shuddered. And then it was over. The Void Walker collapsed in on itself, its body dissolving into nothing. The stolen energy it had carried was released, flowing back into the universe like rain returning to the ocean. The darkness that had threatened to consume everything was gone. Kale floated in space, his sword dimming as the danger passed. He was exhausted in ways he could not describe. But he was alive, and so was humanity. When he returned to the orbital station, he found Chun waiting for him. Her eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "How did you do that?" she asked. Kale looked at his sword. The runes had faded back to simple carvings, ancient and mysterious. But he knew they would glow again when the next threat arose. They always did. "I did not do it alone," he said. "Every human who has ever lived, everyone who will ever be born, they were all with me." That is what the Void Walker could not understand. We are never alone. We carry each other in our hearts, across time and space. And that makes us stronger than any darkness. He placed the sword back in its sheath and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, other Void Walkers still drifted between galaxies. Other threats waited in the shadows. But humanity would face them, just as they had faced every challenge since the beginning. The hero had won his battle, but the war for existence would never truly end. And as long as humans drew breath, as long as they held on to hope and love and the stubborn will to survive, they would keep fighting. The rune on his blade flickered one last time, a promise and a warning. Danger would come again. And when it did, the sword would be ready.